So our next speaker, Rob van der Veer, has led the efforts to create the Agile guidance notes for SAMM, and that's looking specifically on how to give people guidance on implementing SAMM when you're working in an Agile environment. He'll tell you a lot more about it. It's a super interesting topic, and I think I'll let him introduce himself because he'll do a much better job than I do. So go ahead, Rob.
Thanks very much, Nassim. Hello, everybody, and wow, a round table with 150 people. That's a large table. It's a real delight to get this opportunity to present and to discuss Agile guidance today to such a large audience. So let's get started right away. I'd like to discuss the work we've done for SAMM on secure software development, specifically for Agile. And my goal is to share knowledge. I will be talking about the guidance, of course, but I also invite you to share your challenges, your best practices, your lessons learned so that we can learn from each other. There's a good bunch of people joining today, so let's benefit from that wisdom of the crowd, because I definitely am not claiming to have all the answers. So please, during the session, use the chat to pose questions, use Slack, use YouTube, use Zoom, and I will see if I can address all of them, and Nassim will be so kind to assist me with processing your input. Let me first introduce myself. I am click this guy or that guy. This is the front page of OWASP, so I'm not there because I'm important. It's just by coincidence. This was at the Global AppSec in Amsterdam last year, talking about this particular topic also. And I work for SIG, Software Improvement Group. I lead the security and privacy practice. We measure quality of software. We guide organizations through shifting left. We have offices in Amsterdam, New York, etc. And I'm also an expert with ENISA. I recently worked on a report called Advancing Software Security in the EU about security certification and standard harmonization. IEEE, I was involved since the beginning in a community in the Netherlands called Grip on Secure Software Development. I've contributed to SAMM, which is the topic of this session. And I also co-lead the integration project at OWASP. And you might have seen me or my team at one of the OWASP events. We always have a booth in Europe, and we have Code Cluedo competitions. And when you look at these pictures, it really makes you nostalgic and hope that this will be at some point the new normal again, because I surely miss those events, as I guess you also do. A little bit about the integration project. I'm working on this with Spyrus and with Ellie and the team. We're trying to bring OWASP projects more together, and particularly the projects that are about technical controls. We want to provide a central reference index that brings together, for example, a check in ASVS with the corresponding element in the testing guide, with the corresponding proactive control, with the corresponding cheat sheets. And we want to extend this also outside of OWASP, and that way make it easier to link standards, make it easier to maintain standards, but also to easily make gap analysis, and also to find your way if you use one of these sources. Keep an eye on the standards. It's a really cool project for me to work on. Enough about me. Let's talk about Agile secure development. Let's see if I have any messages. No, so apparently sound and visuals are okay. When I do a presentation on software development, I typically would show this diagram. And through the years, I increasingly got complaints and people correcting me, saying that this is completely not Agile, and thereby everything I say about software engineering will be incorrect. So I'm open to this kind of feedback. I often did this, and it does Agile more justice, but it doesn't provide the guidance that is needed. It's not that easy. Even if I would draw a politically correct diagram of the SDLC that would resonate with DevOps, Waterfall, Agile, and everybody would look something like this with all the nuances, it would do justice to the nuances on a high level, but still wouldn't answer the many questions that especially Agile teams have when it comes to secure software development. And there are a lot of questions because, well, Agile security is hard. And I will illustrate that it's hard by using some quotes from my clients. For example, and before I go into it, I invite you to share in chat your biggest challenges when it comes to secure development in Agile. And I hope to address them, but it's also really useful, helpful input in our work to advancing these Agile guidance. So please, your input is very welcome. First quote is, we have no time for security in the sprints, so we have security sprints. Well, traditionally, quality assurance has been a carefully designed single phase in software development with its own bureaucracy, and that was sort of okay. But there's no time for that in Agile. You can't fit that in a sprint. Of course, you can focus some sprints on security features, but the whole idea about shifting left is that you build security in as a non-functional continuously from the beginning. How else are you going to deliver working software, which is your purpose when doing Agile software development? And working doesn't mean that it has the features that it needs to have. It needs to work in the real world. So the key is to find a way to make security fit in every sprint. And that is what the Agile guidance is about. Another quote is, the demo needs to show business features. This is what we typically see, a strong focus in Agile environments on, well, the power of the demo. And I love the idea of the demo. And in many organizations, I see that it really focuses on business value in the form of things that you can click on, and not business value in the form that it will prevent your business to break down, or large fines, or any other bad results from security incidents. The Agile guidance discusses how important it is to really make security owned by everyone, including product owners. So there's also focus on security in the demos. So there's also focus on security in development. Another quote is, we run these tools, so we're good. And of course, it's all about automation. It's very important. You need to automate all the things, but you cannot automate all the things. There's a lot of manual work that you still need to do. So if you get the tools and you get them working, you're not there. You will not find all the security flaws automatically. There's still a lot of manual work to be done. The key is with Agile to see how you can make them fit and to do them interactive. Agile guidance discusses this. Another quote is, everything the developer should know is on the wiki. Let's hope the best for the next pen test in 6 months. So it's a really good effort to get together all the relevant instructions and the coding guidelines and communicate them to the developers. And often this communication is not complete. And of course, any training or whatever knowledge transfer isn't perfect. So the stuff is there on the wiki, maybe 100 pages. You cannot expect developers to memorize these and apply them in practice. You need to find a way so that these requirements and these coding guidelines are more part of the flow and are automatically part of the work of the developers. So coding guidelines, getting requirements to get a yes, but then you need to assure that they're being applied in practice. And last but not least, we made John responsible for security, so now it's no longer my problem. This is the whole champion idea. And of course, the champion idea is, it's a good one. You need champions, but there's many wrong ways to appoint a champion. You can appoint somebody who's too introvert to be a good champion. You can appoint someone and let everything depend on that person. The person should be sort of like a contact person. But once you appoint a champion, the responsibility is not gone for the rest of the team. So sometimes you see this anti-pattern where in this case, John needs to take care of everything. And of course, that will not work. So there appears to be a strong need in the industry for guidance on how to make secure software development work in an agile environment. How can you do that? Well, let's have a look. There are books about it. I actually have this particular book here. It's quite a good book, Agile Application Security, published by O'Reilly. And when you look it up, it says, tracking and dealing with non-functional requirements like security and reliability is an unsolved problem in Agile development. So there you go. At least this book is honest, right? This is the current situation. So looking it up will not solve it. My question to you is, would you share sources that have been helpful for you in your process guidance when it comes to Agile and secure software development? I would welcome them. So what are we dealing with? Security in Agile. I've used Scrum as an example, where you're dealing with a product backlog and you need to do refinement, where you prepare stories to be put on the sprint backlog, and you do sprint planning also to do this type of assignment and estimations. And in this process, you are planning and you are preparing security. And in the process of a sprint, where you're doing daily scrums and you have this certain rhythm of 2, 3, 4 weeks, you need to implement security into a shippable product. And the challenge is to make everything happen every sprint with security. You do many short iterations. Every iteration you want to deliver software that is ready with security built in. So how do you squeeze all the necessary activities into a sprint? Requirement selection, threat modeling, verification. What do you do with stories, with the view stories, and with the definition of done? How do you get rid of the bureaucracy that is sometimes involved in how security teams and developers cooperate? This is the big question, of course. And perhaps the answer is in SAMM. Well, SAMM discusses business functions and practices. At the same time, as said, it is agnostic of the type of development approach. And this is why Agile is not covered. I mean, many things that happen in Agile software development are covered because they are typical for software development. But if you're agnostic, you can attain an elegant model. And this is why this method agnostic approach is, I think, a good decision. And therefore, there's room to do stuff like making Agile guidance. And the Agile guidance basically explains how SAMM practices specifically work for Agile in the form of best practices and pitfalls, like the pitfalls that you saw in the customer quotes. There's really a lot of things you can do wrong. And shockingly, if you Google, you find many of these things as advices on the World Wide Web. For example, the advice to use the planning meeting to see what stories need security. You can do this, of course, but there are much better ways to do this, because in the planning meeting, there's a plenary meeting, there's too many people, you are planning, you should be planning everything that you need to plan, including security, should be already there in the stories. I'm not saying that your process will fail if you do this in a planning meeting. I'm just saying it's not a good idea. I've been working on this since April 2018, in collaboration, of course, with the working group, with industry peers, with clients. Some of these peers are Michael Kuipers from Centric and Erik Nuland from ICTU. And we did this based on our own experience in the field, by studying many organizations on what works and what doesn't work, and by doing observations, interviews, and by looking into the many publications on this topic. Let me have a glance at my chat to see if anything coming in. Scrolling.
There is one question, Rob. Oh, actually, there are a few answers to some of the questions that you posed. I'll let you handle them whenever you want. And there was one question that came up, how to convince my product owner that PBI about security is important. And please don't answer, invite him or her to this meeting, was the offered answer.
Yes, well, it needs to be a business insight that there's, of course, a business problem in having a security incident, but also a business problem in solving security issues late. I mean, the business case is that if you test at the end, so you're not shifting left, but you're doing late tests, you need to do rework, so you're not being efficient. There's research that shows that this rework is 100 times more, takes 100 times more effort than when you do it right straight away. And this is the whole business case for shift left. Especially businesses need to appreciate, of course, the benefits from Agile, but also the downsides that when you want to release a product so often, you increase risk. You need to do more about risk management and deal with security issues. So it's about explaining the efficiency increase in your process, reducing the rework. It is about explaining, of course, the downsides of a security incident. And what also often is the case is when there is a client and a vendor situation, you don't want to be in a situation where you do a pen test and you find a couple of issues that you need to debate on who needs to solve it. I mean, if you build in security from the beginning, you will not have this debate and you will have a smooth collaboration between business and development. Because of the time, I'm moving on. I hope I addressed the question sufficiently. Otherwise, please let us know. By the way, this whole thing got initiated because I was working on a Dutch government guideline on agile security with the CIP organization. It's called Agile Security Management. And it was, in a way, repeating the work that was done within SAMM. And we wanted to add the Agile best practices on top. So I decided to go talk to the SAMM group and convince the CIP organization that the guidelines should refer to SAMM and that we would extend SAMM with Agile guidelines and then translate that into Dutch because that was one of the requirements. So this was the original initiation of this taking place. Now, there's no time, of course, to go through the whole guidance together. So I'll show you a detailed example later. We'll discuss the main principles behind the guidance. But first, what does it look like and what does it cover? Here on this slide, you can see at the bottom a zoomed out version of the Agile guidance. So it's not big. It doesn't have to be big. It covers the most important aspects of the whole, where in the whole SAMM model there are specific particularities for Agile. It also reads as a separate document. So it's of course reference, but it's also well designed to be readable as a piece. Doing a little screenshot demo now. The integration in the SAMM website was recently released with the great help of Patricia Duarte. It's in the guidance menu. There's a little Agile menu. If you click on it, you get to the SAMM Agile guidance. Here at the top is the URL. There's also a link to a recording of a previous presentation I did on this page. And when there's a topic, like in this case, requirements in stories, there are links to the relevant elements in the SAMM core model. Next step is to see how we can link back. So this is what we really want. You are at software requirements and you want to know how am I going to deal with this in an Agile situation. And there will be a little link somewhere that will take you to the relevant node in the Agile guidance. So this is a way to keep the core model agnostic, elegant, and nicely clean, but also be able to add specific aspects on, let's say, DevOps or Agile. So what do we cover in the Agile guidance? We're guiding, and here you see part of the core model with elements of the Agile guidance in there. We cover metrics, we cover that security is a shared responsibility, the topic of security champions, team autonomy, incremental threat modeling, selecting and preparing requirements and using them in stories, zoom in on abuse stories, and Agile testing. Agile testing and requirements are the larger topics in the whole. I see something coming in from Milos. He says, usually AppSec is a silo outside of Scrum teams, which leads to bad comms and low collaborations. Exactly. This is one of my key points in this presentation, and also a key point in Agile guidance. You cannot have this two-department situation anymore where you go back and forth. You need to start collaborating. So AppSec teams should work closer to engineering teams. And that's the only way to make security work in Agile. It's one of the key recommendation models. There's a lot of pitfalls in the document. I would like to see if there are any mistakes that you made or a friend of you made that you can warn us for. For example, well, let's pick one. Abuse story galore is about the overuse of abuse stories. Sometimes abuse stories will be put on a sprint backlog. That's not a very good practice, because typically abuse stories are more general, and you want your security requirements and your verifications to be part of the relevant story. So this is just one of the examples of the pitfalls to look out for that are discussed in the Agile guidance. So if you have any pitfalls or anti-patterns yourself, I would be happy to hear about them. What are the main principles behind the Agile guidance? Well, of course, automate all the things, automate as much as possible, both static and dynamic testing. So you need tools to scan your code and tools that try to break into your system. But then you're not done, because there's still a lot of manual work that needs to take place. The trick is to rely on expertise as little as possible by being more efficient, also to prevent people burning out. Well, you sometimes hear stories of one security expert for every 50 developers. Those are very toxic and dangerous situations if you're not efficient. So it's not about getting rid of experts. It's about well, using them in the most efficient way and not burning them out. And one way to become more efficient is to reduce the size of the whole security problem by, of course, building on proven technology, proven components, proven libraries. This will save you time in development, but mostly you have less security to worry about. There are, of course, issues with third-party dependencies, with regards to freshness, with regards to licenses, with regards to security vulnerabilities. But in general, this is a best practice. Don't build your own cryptography. There are some exceptions, but mostly this is not something that you do yourself. And that way you don't have to spend a lot of time on threat modeling and testing stuff, because that already has taken place for you. Manual verification, using code reviewing, penetration testing, you want to make that incremental as possible. There are some tips for that in the Agile guidance. Short feedback cycles are important. This ties into the comment of Milos, where, well, instead of having a quality gate, you don't want to go back and forth between development and test. You need to shift left. So you need to work together, security experts, developers, testers. They all need to be in on the same game. And it's important to have guidance for developers. Instructions so they don't need constant human help. More about that in the detailed example after this. The goal is to minimize the things that developers need to have in their mind, to minimize the cognitive load, and also by doing so, reducing the amount of effort that they need with regards to help from security experts. So in other words, there is no time in a sprint to get the development work done and then send it to security for testing. You want to shift left together, and this puts security professionals much more in an advisory and supportive role than in a role of a quality gate. This also means that all developers and testers should own security, including the product owner, really shifting left. So let's look at one of the key things you can do to streamline the manual work, and that has to do with threat analysis versus hygiene. If you're going to build a function, a feature, if you're refining a story, you can do a threat analysis session. So you're in a room with your team, and you're doing perhaps a bunch of stories. You're preparing this. So what are we doing is the first question. Well, we're building a login form. What can go wrong? Well, somebody says SQL injection. Another person says eavesdropping of passwords. And another person is really clever and says, yeah, well, if you reset your passwords, the message that you get can disclose if this is a known user or not. We should be worried about that. Take this into account. Well, this is a helpful process, but it's overkill for things that are, well, they speak for themselves. In many situations, it's much better to use a hygiene approach or a hardening approach where, for example, if you're having dinner, you first wash your hands. You're not doing constant threat analysis during the day. There's simply a number of rules or protocols, especially these days, by the way, which are situational instructions. And this is what you want for your developers instead of asking from them that they will threat analysis everything. You want to reduce this burden and want to help them to recognize what they're building. So they are building a login form. This can be done using triggers. And these triggers can be collected. There's more on that later. And these triggers will help developers to identify the types of requirements and elements that they need to take into account. So in this case, there will be a tool or documentation that will show to the developers, okay, if you're building a login form, these are the things that you always should do, no matter any risk analysis. This is just basic hygiene. And one of these things is that the reset passwords also should take a similar time for known users and unknown users. I think this is a good example of something that you not always think about, but somebody thought about this for you, and it's on the list of things that belongs to the trigger of building a login form. The threat is that people can find out if an individual has an account on a website by doing reset password, entering the email address. And if that takes longer, that can be an indication that this person is indeed somebody who is known, which can be sensitive information. So the idea behind analysis versus hygiene is, yes, of course, threat modeling is very useful. It's also very useful to create awareness within teams. And it's helpful not to be depending on such analysis for trivial things. These trivial things you want to catch with basic hygiene, where you connect the right security requirements with the right triggers. And there's a section on this in Agile Guidance, and also a separate section on how you can make incremental threat modeling work. And if you want, I'd like to hear your tricks to achieve continual threat modeling in your experience. Let's have a look at if there's any new questions. I'll take this one later.
I've been, all right, I'll let you review them. Sorry.
Thanks, Nestor. Yes. I want to take you on a little tour with one of the key parts of Agile Guidance. And this is the part where we talk about requirements flow. The key is to minimize the daily instructions that developers need to work with, and to let as many as possible depend on the type of task they are working on, for them to be effective and to require as little help as possible, but also to require as little testing as possible. If the testing is automated, that's all fine. If the testing is manual, you want to reduce that. So you want to actually reduce the number of applicable requirements for every situation. This starts with the process where you will, per system, so if you're building a website, for example, you want to select and prepare requirements, and together with these requirements, you want to have instructions for developers how to make them happen. This is, of course, a different language. The tests that need to be performed to validate whether these requirements are being met, and if possible, triggers that link the type of work that you're doing to the requirement being relevant or not. And if you're doing this, and this process often includes a risk analysis, there is a part that is not applicable to developers. A couple of requirements that are more in some processes that are covered by other people. I'm not saying operations, because we often see a combination of that in teams, but there are always requirements that can be removed, well, not removed, but deferred to different group. Also, there are requirements that are simply not relevant for the system because you're not using specific technologies. And there are threats in there that you can accept the risks for your particular application. So this also reduces the set of requirements. As mentioned, building on proven technology, using a framework, for example, it can help you cover a lot of security requirements already, reducing the amount of remaining requirements. And many of these requirements will be story specific. So if you're building a login form, you need to do A, B, and C. If you're building an API, you need to do A, F, and C. And these requirements you put into what we call a pick list. And it's basically a set of triggers that connects the type of functionality that you're building with the set of requirements that are applicable. And I'll explain later how you can do this in practice. And the remaining requirements that are not story specific, but they are applicable, are system generic requirements. These are requirements that for every release need to be checked, and they need to be taken into account. You want this to be this set to be as small as possible, just to, well, make it easy for developers to take this into account. How do you make this work? Well, the stuff that is done by the framework, that's nice, but you also need to provide this as an instruction. So, dear developers, always look in the framework first, then build it yourself. A test is, well, are developers actually using frameworks? In our assessments, we see that frameworks provide a lot of functionality, but it's not being used consistently. This is typically the case with, for example, input and output encoding. And this is a check that you would typically see on a peer review checklist to verify whether the framework is being used. For example, when new user input is being requested. The story-specific instructions, where necessary, you can put them in the pick list and also accompany them with ready-made tests for acceptance, including code reviews, scans, and tests. So the nice thing about this pick list, so if you're, for example, building a new API endpoint, there's a set of things that come with their instructions that are brief and to the point for the developers, with ready-made tests that you can easily deploy to check this story. This is stuff that you can all prepare on a system level, but particularly on a level of a whole portfolio or a whole development department, where you share these pick lists together with these ready-made code review instructions, scans, and tests. So you can really quickly, in a sprint, add this to a story and have as little work in preparation as possible. And generic instructions, where necessary, You can prepare ready-made tests for definition of done, including code reviews, scans, and tests. This is, I think, a nice moment to have a look at what came in as response to the questions. To my questions, what are your big challenges with secure development in Agile? Somebody responded, business logic vulnerabilities. Yes. Tools can't find them, pen tests are slow and expensive, they're manual and take some time and knowledge to find. These are words that I've spoken myself so many times. And this is so much overlooked. The business logic vulnerabilities, typically tools can help you find some clues for them, but typically not. For example, you're getting somebody's password, but you're not checking whether it's correct, right? There's some business logic flaws in there that typically tools cannot detect. The key is to make manual code review and peer review as efficient as possible, and to empower everybody in the team to do these peer reviews. And with the peer reviews, have, of course, these requirements there, so you can check for typical mistakes to make your peer reviews much more effective. So that's business logic vulnerabilities. Another example of big challenge is consideration of security when features are being decided by product management. So product managers know what is driving the business and what customers want, but they don't think about security when setting up requirements for new features. Yes, this is a problem indeed, where you have a culture where product management, and especially the product owner, which is typically your point in contact in an Agile situation as a team member, if they drive everything by features. If you have a culture where you say, we have a hygiene, this is what you do, this is what we agree on. If we prepare stories, we look at the triggers, we look at the general definition of done. Can we agree on the triggers? Can we agree on it? Yes, this is what we do. Then it's a normal thing. And then it's something that you agreed on with the product owner to always build in, to always do, like you wash your hands when you're going to have dinner. So that's about feature-driven cultures. Another big challenge is security checks will lengthen the sprints, which is not acceptable for most teams. Necessary fixes will not fit into the sprint. Yes, this is a daily reality in Agile. The whole point of the Agile guidance is to reduce this problem, but you will not get rid of it. Just like you will not get rid of Agile having to deal with anything that pops up, like a feature that doesn't work. Sometimes that also has to wait until the next sprint. So it's something to anticipate. In the meantime, try to make the security tests as lean as possible. Of course, sometimes you need to do a full penetration test. Doing that and fixing the stuff will not fit into a sprint. That's one of the exceptions you have to deal with. The final point that was mentioned as one of the bigger challenges, I thank you very much, by the way, for submitting these, very useful. The point says, if you are in a project situation towards the deadline, quality dies. This is true, and this is all the more the reason to shift left and be working on quality all the time. If you have a culture or a way of working where you postpone this and do all the checking at the end, you will have to deal with, well, the haste that comes with the deadline. But yes, we've seen that and experienced that quality suffers when things need to go out really fast. The importance there is to do this transparently. So the person that decides to not fix a certain security topic needs to explain this. the whole traceability of these decisions, these risk-based or business-made decisions, as long as you make sure that they are transparent, there will be a judgment that will weigh from a business perspective these things, and sometimes security suffers. Let's move on and go back to the points that you guys brought up after this, because I want to dive into how you, in your practice, use requirement sources. So are you using ASVS? Are you using other sources for requirements? And how do you channel them? And with channel, I mean, do you use a wiki? Do you use cards? So Eric Newland from ICTU has a nice best practice where they have physical cards, which are nowadays a little bit more problematic. But in general, having things physically present at a development office space, gives them some extra attention incentive. And these cards would present triggers that connect the thing that you're going to build to the relevant requirements. But there are also tools like SKF, of course, or risk. There's a lot of these tools out there. I'd like to hear whether you guys are using them or perhaps building something yourself. And I suspect that Excel is going to be one of the answers, because Excel is always one of the answers. How do you make these processes work according to the Agile guidance? Well, as said, per system, you are selecting and preparing requirements. So with instructions, with tests and triggers. This leads to a definition of done that contains the generic requirements. It leads to a pick list with your specific requirements. And if you're doing threat analysis, and mostly you will, it will lead to a threat model that is very useful in further establishing security requirements. Let's see if there are any urgent matters. Yes. Using the pick list and using the threat model, you're doing something per story. So in the creation of the story or during backlog refinement, so preferably not during planning, during the planning meeting, you're adding relevant requirements to story acceptance criteria. And you use the triggers, for example, to link what you're about to build to the relevant requirements. And with these requirements come the instructions and the tests. If you cannot use triggers, you can use expertise. So you can have refinement sessions with security experts that help you come up with the necessary hygiene or the necessary ideas, or use threat analysis if you're uncomfortable with the situation. And of course, this leads to user stories with these acceptance criteria, together with instructions for the developers and together with the tests that need to be done. And basically, this means that the definition of ready for a story is that security checks should be there. And the definition of done is actually that the security validation that is has been added to the user stories also needs to be performed. So you're dealing with backlog management, we're dealing with designing, building, testing, deploying, and of course, it's Agile, right? So there's this nice circle there. It's continuous. It's not easy, but it's doable. Improvements in technology, better frameworks, reduce our problems. You can see the rise of tools that help here. I mentioned SKF. There are other great tool sets that help you deal with the requirements and make them situational, provide developers with relevant instructions, movies even that explain the vulnerabilities, but also explain what you need to do. the great work of the many guidances that have been made, like for example the cheat sheet series really help. So a lot of things are moving that help address this problem of making secure software in Agile. And with that, those were my slides. This was my presentation of Agile guidance. I would welcome your feedback on the Agile guidance and your experience very much. We still have a number of questions and some input from you to go through right after this. There's one final word from me as to the presentation. Well, we talked about security and of course, OWASP is about AppSec, but everything I've been saying should go for other quality aspects of software engineering: maintainability, privacy, reliability, performance efficiency, all aspects that are not always directly measurable, that need attention, that require developer instructions and verification, that require preparation, that require requirements. So these processes in the Agile guidance, they go for many of the other non-functionals as other than security. So my personal overarching advice is to see if you can make your security program a software quality program. Good luck with that. And let's go to questions and points. Nesting, perhaps you can help me out here.
Yep, thanks, Rob. So I think you saw in, well, answers to your questions, there were quite a few. It's interesting, I think, and maybe telling that the second question, what sources are you using for process guidance? No answers. We had quite a few answers to all the other ones. So those are grouped. I'll let you decide if you want to go through them or not. But in terms of questions, there are a couple more that have popped up. There's one from John Stephen. Having studied firms over the last 2 years, I would say that engineering-led security initiatives have stopped accepting this concept that we typically say least amount of friction possible for security in security controls. And instead, they're now looking for asynchronous security controls or activities that actually speed up delivery. And so his question there is, what examples have you seen in these two spaces that work effectively for development teams? It's quite a long one, so it may be easier to read.
Well, yeah. So let's see. Having studied firms for over the last 2 years, I would say that engineering-led security initiatives have stopped accepting the least amount of friction possible in security controls. I think I'm going to ask John to elaborate.
I think if I guess we can definitely let, I guess a simple one, we could definitely let John actually, I think, speak here.
Yes, just activated on John's.
What security activities can SAMM prescribe in your experience that speed up delivery? Where should people look to use their security time that will increase agility for a team?
Interesting question. Really, it's almost philosophical. Because building security in takes more effort. The thing is, if you don't do it right away, it will take you even more effort. So the whole idea of shifting left is to work on it as soon as you can, starting with requirements. So that means that the answer is everything will slow you down. And if you don't do it, it will slow you down even more. So, but that's later. I mean, you can really quickly get a great MVP out there and a demo out there. But the problem is that you need to deal with it, later. Make sense, John?
Thanks.
Maybe, Seba here, I can add to that the activities in the security practice education and guidance will upfront are a little bit of investment in terms of security activities, but will definitely help agile teams to become more, I would say, to become faster at handling security questions.
Perhaps
Yes.
a clarification from John. Was your question specific to Agile, or was it SAMM in general, methodology agnostic? Because I suppose the activities, yeah, that I mentioned are not specifically Agile related. So I don't know if your question is specifically Agile related and related to the guidance, or more of a general SAMM question in particular, or in general.
So, you know, there are heavyweight activities in these models, and there are activities that find vulnerabilities, call the developers baby ugly. There are testing ones. There are a variety of different kinds. Over the last few years, what I've seen is that organizations are beginning to do fewer of those activities, deprioritize them. And they're instead preferring activities that may speed developers up, like, you know, using a particular developer to integrate a contextually aware output encoding library, as opposed to chasing cross-site scripting across the site. And so they're beginning to try to find ways to accelerate, and that increases agility for the team because they don't have to stop and test and fix. They are truly building security in. And so I was just wondering from a SAMM perspective where SAMM as a model is seeing those activities and which ones are working maybe, and which ones are maybe being tried but aren't working as well.
So I can answer that from, I can extend my answer regarding the Agile guidance, particularly reducing the problem of security by, as you described, building on proven technology, using a framework that takes care of a lot of the things that you would normally need to take care of as a developer is certainly a way to speed up. Perhaps somebody else on the call can answer this with regards to the SAMM core model.
Well, yes, Seba here. So in your particular example is a good one, Stephen. And if I'd want to, or if I need to map it on some, it would probably fit on the scalable baseline practice as part of security testing, whereas indeed there you have the different ways of adding tooling to pipelines. But indeed, it's the model itself is not necessarily geared towards as such towards accelerating it, but there's definitely a couple of placeholders that would allow you to do that. But it's definitely broader, that it allows for a lot of these activities. But depending on your development process, you'd want to pick the ones that suit you best. And in terms of what you just explained, that scalable baseline would probably be the one.
And maybe to add to this, like Seba said, the SAMM model in itself is agnostic of the actual controls. But what you do see over the last years is that companies are also shifting some of their effort from preventative controls to more like detective controls. And of course, that's also a totally different ballgame in terms of how much effort you need to spend upfront in your development to have that working for your application. So that's also, I think, a big shift in companies over the past couple of years, which is changing the game, in my opinion.
John, is that good for you?
I'm happy.
Great to hear.
Another question, and just one that also came up, another slightly long one with an intro. So development teams are taking on nowadays, I guess in an agile context, more and more and broader roles these days. So you end up doing business analysis, there's project management involved, there's test management, and the idea is now they're supposed to be security experts. I suppose we're talking here about self-contained, self-driving teams. So the day-to-day reality is that one or more of these different roles that development teams are taking on will have to be squeezed so thin that it'll become almost ineffective. And the question then is, how can security be sold in bite-sized pieces so it fits into the time, cost, benefit balance in business? Sorry, Rob, you invited questions. You're getting a tricky one.
Oh dear, oh dear. This is again about business case. It's general. It has a link, of course, to Agile, where you see many the typical situation where people have many roles, and this introduces overhead, but it also introduces some efficiency where people can collaborate more. So I don't think this problem of squeezing would in practice be more of a problem with Agile teams than with other teams. But selling security in bit-sized pieces, yeah, again, comes down to, and I've addressed this earlier in the session, the risk appetite of the organization when it comes to incidents, and the understanding of the extra costs that are involved with doing rework later, and the issues that are there when you're doing a late test and you're confronted with the situation where you have to debate between business and development, between a client and vendor, with who's responsible to fix this. Those are the typical business case elements. I'm not sure whether I addressed this question sufficiently. For that, perhaps, I think this is Michael Allen. We can take this offline, and please find me over Twitter or email to discuss further. And because of the time, I also would like to have a look at the response to my questions. One of my questions was, what is your trick to achieve continual threat modeling? There is one: periodical threat modeling didn't work for me. I switched to triggers too. So that's Timo Pagel, if I pronounce it correctly, probably not. Okay, so there are situations where people are running into issues with incremental threat modeling. My recommendation would be to do, well, just like you do pen testing on your entire system, to do complete threat modeling regularly, not every week, but perhaps every 6 months, every year for your system, to look at everything again if incremental threat modeling fails. A question on continual threat modeling was, who defines the triggers? For example, security teams, QA teams. This is from Juan Martinez. Typically, triggers are defined in the preparation phase. So you're not doing this during development, but you're doing this as an exercise as a department. So security teams would be involved, but also developers would be involved because you need this expertise on the types of functionality that you're building. So this will be a security team, development team effort in preparing these triggers. Moving to my question, what requirement sources do you use and how do you channel them? One response was business model and core values to make the risk profile clear. Yes, that's something that you need to do. But still you need to be, after that, you need to select requirements on a technical level based on this business model and this risk profile. Another response was self-service questionnaire. It asks some questions and depending on the answers, replies back with the requirements for the functionality. Ah, yes, that sounds really nice. And contextual advice depending on the language, technology, stack, etc. It doesn't say what tool this is. It sounds like one of the tools that I mentioned, but there are many out there. They're very helpful. You use the tool to specify what type of functionality you're going to build, what the architecture will look like, for example, and it will select relevant requirements and even allow you to annotate and track those requirements. And with that, I am through most of the responses to the questions that I posed. Thanks for your responses. Back to Nassim, because we're nearing the 1 hour limit. If there are any more questions or remarks.
I think that was, oh, yeah, no, I think going on. That was it for questions for you, Rob. Thank you very much. That was incredibly good time management too, and really interesting. And it worked, I think, reasonably, actually better than I expected, the concept of roundtable with 200 plus attendees.